Hello and welcome to episode 205 of the official EstablishTheRun.com podcast. My name is Adam Levitan. I'm one of the co-founders here at ETR, as always, joined by fellow co-founder Evan Silva. And July 4th is behind us. Evan's annual vacation to the beautiful Cape Cod is behind us. At this point, nothing stands between us and the glory that is peak fantasy football season. Evan, nice hat. What's going on?
Yeah, what's going on, man? It feels like we haven't done this in multiple weeks, which I think is correct. But it's good to get back on the grind. Immediately returned from the beautiful Cape Cod to Chicago on Monday and got right back on the grind, grinding out team previews, getting this top 150 where I want it before training camp starts. Training camp starts soon, man. I mean, we're talking 2 weeks on the dot here as we record on July 13th, and got to be ready for it.
Yep, exactly. Team by team previews are up on the site as Evan. We post those as Evan gets each one done. Be sure to check those out. I think one of the best ways to get ready for this season. On today's show, we are going to circle back on coaching changes for the upcoming season and how we think they will affect player performance. We hit on this topic way back in February in episode 163, but since then we've had free agency, we've had the draft, we've had OTAs. And I actually think it's a really important topic, so we wanted to cover it again. Before we get into today's show, I wanted to remind everyone this program is brought to you by our friends at Underdog Fantasy. It is still best ball season, and Underdog is undoubtedly the best platform. For details on our promos with them, head to the Best Ball site, head to the Best Ball tab on the site. Also, wanted to remind everyone that Silva's Top 150, his tiers, team-by-team previews, changelog are all up and running in our draft kit. He'll continue to tweak those up until September. It's just $34.99. Head to the site for details on that. All right, I think one of the most interesting coaching changes is in Atlanta, especially given what they've decided to do with Julio Jones. Arthur Smith replaces the Dan Quinn regime. Arthur Smith will call plays. But man, what a start for this Arthur Smith era. They drafted tight end, unprecedented, drafted tight end at number 4 overall. Then they trade one of the faces of their franchise, Julio Jones, away. They invest almost zero capital at the running back position. You know, it's a really interesting spot for Arthur Smith to land it. I feel like they're almost trying to rebuild and not rebuild. And sometimes it can go really bad when you're trying to do both at the same time, be good and rebuild at the same time. So anyways, from a fantasy perspective, what's your take on how this is going to shake out for Arthur Smith and the Falcons?
Yeah, and I would say they are definitively not rebuilding. I mean, they're not even trying to half step a rebuild. I think that they think that they can compete. They extended Matt Ryan. They used the number 4 overall pick. They passed on multiple quarterback prospects at that selection. And I think that they can compete. They can get a little bit better on defense, and they can score a lot of points. And I trust Arthur Smith based on all the smart things that he did in Tennessee to build the Falcons offense around their player personnel strengths. And that would involve lots of Calvin Ridley, lots of Kyle Pitts, using Mike Davis heavily in the passing game. But I also think that Arthur Smith will carry over many of his successful concepts from Tennessee: heavy play action, multiple tight end sets with Pitts and Hayden Hurst on the field together. I think that Hayden Hurst actually is kind of a sleeper in tight end premium leagues. You can get him really, really cheaply. But I think that Arthur Smith is going to focus on raising the Falcons' offensive efficiency. Last year, the Falcons were 16th in yards per drive. In Arthur Smith's 2 years calling plays for the Titans, they were 14th and 3rd in yards per drive. I think that that's going to be what he emphasizes, and he's going to build this offense around the Falcons' player strengths and not try to pretend that Mike Davis is Derrick Henry.
Yeah, exactly. And I think we'll see a ton, like you mentioned, of 2 tight end sets: Hurst and Pitts, Gage and Calvin Ridley, and then Zacchaeus come on in the three wide receiver sets that they do run. This run game has been so broken under Dan Quinn. I mean, Todd Gurley was a mess, and Brian Hill's spot starts were often a mess, and Smith was a mess, and Devontae Freeman in 2019 was a mess. I know that I've joked a lot about 90% CMC in Mike Davis, but I'm really worried that he's going to be really inefficient in the run game. Like you said, the Arthur Smith, I think, is a sharp guy. The way to get Mike Davis going is in the pass game. So, if Mike Davis can rack up 5, 6, 7 targets per game, well, now we're talking. That'd be a lot for a running back, obviously, but we'll see. I am skeptical on their run game though. And if you're following the props that we've been betting on the season long side, do have a bet on Mike Davis under rushing yards for this season. Let's go to Jacksonville. Urban Meyer, he of the college success at Utah and Florida and Ohio State, he takes over the Jaguars and he has Trevor Lawrence. So maybe a lot of this stuff won't matter. In other words, Trevor Lawrence can cover up a lot of this stuff. But man, I have not loved what Urban Meyer has done, showing, I think, too much allegiance to college guys like Carlos Hyde that he knew and Tim Tebow, and saying he wanted Kadarius Toney and then using a round one pick on Travis Etienne, a running back. I don't know. I just haven't gotten a great vibe from Urban Meyer. That said, Darrell Bevell is going to be the one calling plays, and I do think Darrell Bevell is competent. I guess my question for you is, do you think this Bevell Urban Meyer regime can support DJ Chark and Laviska and Marvin and Etienne? It's just asking a lot of this offense to support all those guys, going from such a bad offense, something that can support all these guys that are going reasonably high in fantasy. So what's your expectations for Urban Meyer and Darrell Bevell?
Yeah, so I really do agree with you regarding, like, from a real life standpoint, analyzing what the Jaguars have done under Urban Meyer with all the assets that they had. I mean, they essentially tanked for a little bit over a year. They traded away Jalen Ramsey. They traded away a bunch of guys. They had a ton of draft capital. I don't think that they made the most of it. I think I gave them like a C- or something for their draft grade. Mm-hmm. And so I'm with you that their real life moves have not been, I don't think that they maximized their assets. But from a fantasy standpoint, my optimism for this year's Jaguars stems from Darrell Bevell and Trevor Lawrence. And Darrell Bevell, their new offensive coordinator, who was with Seattle, ran some very successful offenses in Seattle, built around that team's strengths and to minimize their weaknesses. And also, was a huge upgrade in Detroit on Jim Bob Cooter, who built the Lions offense around a slot receiver in Golden Tate and essentially a slot back in Theo Riddick, throwing the ball, at very low ADOTs with, one of the strongest arm passers in the league. Darrell Bevell comes in, they're stretching the field vertically. And they were very, very proficient when Kenny Golladay was in the lineup. So I like Darrell Bevell's track record. And I think that adding him here, I think, is going to maybe smooth over some of your concerns about our Urban Meyer. And then, I agree with our previous guest, Matt Waldman, that Trevor Lawrence is the kind of quarterback that can come in immediately and elevate his teammates, elevate his supporting cast, make the offensive line, which is talented, but has had, has been marginalized by the quarterback play of Gardner Minshew and, Nick Foles and, some of these really bad quarterbacks that they've trotted. I mean, Gardner Minshew is, we like him, but he's not very good. Yeah. And so I think that Trevor Lawrence can come in immediately and have a rookie year like Andrew Luck's and raise the tides of everyone around him.
Yeah, for sure. And we're going to get into DJ Chark in the next episode here coming up shortly. Let's go to the Los Angeles Chargers here. Brandon Staley is the new head coach, former defensive coordinator of the Rams. More importantly, I think for our purposes, Joe Lombardi will be calling plays as the offensive coordinator. And for those of you who don't know Joe Lombardi, of course, former right-hand man, longtime right-hand man of Sean Payton. And so we have these thoughts dancing in our head. Well, Big Mike Williams is going to play the X. He's going to play the Michael Thomas role. And Eckler is going to play the Alvin Kamara role. And dare I say, Big Dick Don Parham in the old Jimmy Graham role. I'm kidding. I know that they brought in the corpse of Jared Cook. But anyways, there's a lot of optimism around the Chargers. I know you're high on Austin Eckler. We'll talk about him more next episode. He's going in round 1. Keenan Allen in round 3. Herbert is right there with Russ Wilson in that middle range, that kind of QB6, QB7 range. I talked about Big Mike yesterday on this podcast in the ADP Risers and Fallers episode. His ADP is up in the 80s, 81st, 82nd overall. So there's a lot of optimism here for Joe Lombardi and this talented Chargers offense. What can you tell the people about Joe Lombardi and how do you think he's going to handle all the talent here?
Well, I do want to start by just pointing out that Brandon Staley, I think that we should start with him because I think he showed with the Rams that he's a progressive defensive mind. He emphasized pass defense, sold out to stop the pass, which is kind of like a new way for years was all you start, your defense starts up front. You got to get pass rush and then you can, cover up your problems and any problems that you might have in your secondary. Now it's like emphasizing secondary play, trying to manufacture pressure with blitzing, and really maximized the play of Jalen Ramsey and Aaron Donald. Jalen Ramsey and Aaron Donald were moved all around the formation. Aaron Donald was used as like an edge rusher. Brandon Staley would match him up against the worst offensive lineman and just, attack relentlessly. Jalen Ramsey would play all over the field. He wasn't even necessarily a shadow corner last year for the Rams. And they used him in a variety of different ways, often in the middle of the field. He played some slot corner, which he also did at Florida State, but he was a havoc wrecker. And Brandon Staley created an elite defense despite having a pretty mediocre roster behind those two guys. Mm-hmm. So, and he's the guy who hired Joe Lombardi. I have faith in Brandon Staley from that standpoint. When you look at Joe Lombardi's history, he spent a season and a half as the Lions offensive coordinator in 2014, 2015 under Jim Caldwell. It went poorly. The 2014 Lions finished 22nd in scoring. And then Lombardi was fired after 7 games the following year. But he was young at the time. He spent the last 5 years working for Sean Payton as the Saints quarterbacks coach. So I think the jury is definitely out on Joe Lombardi. But at the same time, it's hard to imagine him and Brandon Staley being any worse than Anthony Lynn was. And the Chargers have a ton of young talent and a revamped offensive line. I think it's going to be really hard for Lombardi to mess this up.
Yeah, and that's the thing. I mean, Justin Herbert was awesome last year with Anthony Lynn, and we'll get to Anthony Lynn a little bit more here in a second, but certainly think Joe Lombardi would be more creative and more progressive than Anthony Lynn was. Speaking of more creative, let's go to Seattle. And I want to talk about this one. Obviously, there's no head coach change, but offensive coordinator change where Shane Waldron takes over for Brian Schottenheimer. Now, the rhetoric is that from Seattle is that they got too vertical last year. In other words, defenses were able to just sit back, didn't let the ball get over their head, and Seattle just couldn't adjust to that, which I kind of find hard to believe. But anyways, I think that the other rhetoric is that Brian Schottenheimer was fired because he didn't run the ball enough. And so my initial thought was, well, hey, they're going to bring Shane Waldron in here, and the command is going to be, you better run the ball some more. That said, I don't think that that's really going to be how it goes. Is there any inkling in your mind that Shane Waldron is actually going to let Russ cook a little bit? And can we be on Russ stacks yet again? Because halfway through last year, it looked like we were printing with Russ stacks, then it just all fell apart.
Yeah, so the emphasis from Shane Waldron so far has been on tempo, playing faster. Mm-hmm. And if you look at his history with the Rams where he was with Sean McVay, the Rams ranked 8th or higher in offensive snaps per game in 3 of those last 4 years with Waldron and McVay on staff. So I think that there is a balance to be found with Pete Carroll. I mean, Pete Carroll obviously always wants to run the ball more. That's something that he believes in philosophically, probably learned as a young coach, and he's going to carry that through until he retires. But if the Seahawks really do increase their offensive tempo and their volume, then that can offset loss in pass run percentage. So I'm still really big on Seattle this year. Tyler Lockett in particularly looks super undervalued again. We're like 12 or at least I'm like 12 spots ahead of ADP when it comes to just straight wide receiver ranks on Tyler Lockett again. Yeah. So we're going to do this thing again. We're going to get great value, I think, on Tyler Lockett again. And I think that this Seattle offense is looking pretty good. I like they made some upgrades on the offensive line. They bring in the rookie Eskridge to add some speed, potentially as a third receiver. I like the addition of Gerald Everett, who is following Shane Waldron from the Rams. Mm-hmm. They've got a lot of explosiveness on offense, and I think they're going to take advantage of it. I'm not too worried about them trying to play ground and pound. I think that they're going to play fast, and they're going to throw the ball hyper efficiently, and all these dudes are going to have big seasons again.
Yep. Okay. Yeah, we're going to talk to Thorman more about that because I know he's been tracking the Seattle stuff with their pace. We'll have him on sometime in early August, late July. The Eagles bring in Nick Sirianni, formerly of the Colts, and also Shane Steichen, formerly of the Chargers, to run their offense. I think the big question people are asking is, A, can they turn Jalen Hurts into a competent throwing quarterback? B, how much will Miles Sanders rotate? Because we saw Nick Sirianni in Indy use JT and Hines, and I think they were going to use Marlon Mack as well. And then in LA with Shane Steichen, they were using Eckler and Ballage even after Eckler got healthy. So I think there's some reason to be concerned that there'll be a lot of rotation here. The Colts also rotated their wide receivers a ton last year. We know that the Eagles don't have the same depth at wide receiver as the Colts did. But anyways, what do you think about Sirianni and Steichen taking over in Philly?
Yeah, so, the Eagles' hire of Nick Sirianni really screamed to me that the owner, Jeff Lurie, and the GM, Howie Roseman, they were chasing the guy that got away, and that's Frank Reich, who was the Eagles' offensive coordinator when they won the Super Bowl in 2017. And the Eagles have never been the same since Frank Reich left. And the Colts under Frank Reich had double-digit wins in 2 of the last 3 years. So the Eagles go and they hire Nick Sirianni, the closest guy to Frank Reich. He's been the offensive coordinator for Frank Reich since Reich went to Indy. But, I think that the pieces that the Eagles have are underrated. They're talented on the offensive line. They're pretty deep on the offensive line. If they can, for once, keep 3 out of the 5 guys healthy, I think they can have a pretty good offensive line. I think they can have a powerful offensive line. They have a dynamic dual threat quarterback in Jalen Hurts, Dallas Goedert, Devontae Smith, last year's first round pick Jalen Reagor, Miles Sanders, Travis Fulgham definitely flashed in his opportunities last season. So most people seem down on the Eagles this year, but I think that they could surprise, especially offensively. Your concerns over the usage of Miles Sanders, though, are very, very valid, and that's why he's really in that RB18 range, as like a mid-level RB2, and not flirting with the first round as he was last year.
Yeah, they certainly have some talent. They drafted Kenny Gainwell. They could still use Boston Scott. They have Kerryon and Jordan Howard. They're not all going to make the team, and I don't know how much gas some of those older guys have left. But yeah, Miles Sanders, I think he's been slipping though, man. You can get him in like the 4th round sometimes now, and I think he's a pretty good pick in the 4th round. But that's a whole other story. Lions, I don't want to spend a lot of time on the Lions. We've beaten them to death, and a lot of people have beaten them to death. But Dan Campbell comes in, replaces the Matt Patricia regime. And one thing I'll say, though, is Sean McVay squeezed a lot out of Jared Goff, man. A lot. And now Goff has Dan Campbell and Anthony Lynn, and his starting receivers are Perriman and the Gazelle. I think it's worrisome for Jared Goff, but that's reflected in the markets. He's like free. What's not reflected in the markets is you still have to spend a pretty penny to get TJ Hawkinson, to get DeAndre Swift. So I think people kind of want your take on how you think this new regime is going to handle, or how hard they're going to feed Hawkinson and Swift.
Well, it just makes logical sense that they would feed the heck out of Hawkinson because he's a stud, and because they've got, retread journeyman at wide receiver. I noticed, though, that, coming back from vacation and going through the recent ADP at in the Football Guys Championship League, and looking where I have people in the top 150 and just doing a clean sweep of the rankings and tiers to make sure they're all updated ahead of camp, is that I'm like substantially lower than consensus on DeAndre Swift. Now, when we're talking about guys that are being drafted in the top 4 to 5 rounds, it's really never a huge gap. And this is only a 4-spot gap in terms of positional ranking. I think it's about a round gap in overall ranking. But I have DeAndre Swift as RB20, and consensus ADP has him at RB16. I think they're going to end up using a lot of Jamal Williams, and that worries me a little bit for DeAndre Swift. And I don't think the Lions are going to score very many touchdowns this year. So if he loses, a substantial number of touches to Jamal Williams, and they're not scoring many touchdowns, they might give the ball to Jamal Williams on the goal line when they do. I think I'm probably going to stay below ADP on DeAndre Swift for the foreseeable future.
There was that quote when we talked about it when we did an episode maybe a month or so ago about how Jamal Williams is a 1A back and DeAndre Swift is a 1B back, and that really tanked DeAndre Swift's ADP. Since then, it's bounced back a little bit, and people are a little bit more optimistic on DeAndre Swift. I think he's probably priced about right now, but I agree that there's a lot of risk if he doesn't catch passes. I mean, he's going to have to catch 60, 70, 80 passes to be viable, and I think he can do that. But yeah, it's certainly serious downside with DeAndre Swift right now. All right, last coaching change we're going to do is the Jets. Robert Saleh is the new head coach. Mike LaFleur comes over from San Francisco as his offensive coordinator. Of course, the Herndon stands are saying that, now, George Kittle, they're going to play the San Francisco scheme, and Chris Herndon's going to play the George Kittle role. I actually think, and I don't know what you think, I'm actually worried that Chris Herndon's going to lose like a lot of time to Ryan Griffin and
or like
Tyler
that he's
Croft.
going to get cut or something.
Yeah, like it could be bad. Like, or he could just be like the third stringer behind Griffin and Croft. Like, I'm pretty much out on Chris Herndon. But anyways, one thing that I would say about this regime is kind of the way the personnel sets up. I think they're going to play a 5-man rotation at wide receiver. I think they're going to rotate a ton at running back with Michael Carter and Tevin Coleman and LaMichael Pirine. And I think they're going to rotate a ton at tight end, as I already said. I mean, that makes for a mess in fantasy. So I don't know how you think they're going to exactly scheme the offense, what you think about Mike LaFleur. But either way, for fantasy, it's tough because I really think they're all going to rotate a ton. But what do you think about LaFleur and what can you tell the people about him?
Yeah, I mean, it comes from the Kyle Shanahan coaching tree. He's Matt LaFleur's brother. He's going to emphasize run after catch in the passing game. And that's where Jamison Crowder and Elijah Moore in particular come in. I also think that Corey Davis can be, effective after the catch. Not so much Denzel Mims. Denzel Mims, I think that one of the reasons that we're seeing him slip down the depth chart is because he's a contested catch downfield receiver and not necessarily a great run after catch guy. So I think that that's one of the reasons that we're seeing him move down the depth chart, the actual depth chart. And I mean, the Jets beat writers are in consensus about this, that he's not a starter anymore. But yeah, I mean, I think that they probably will open the season using heavy rotations at all of those positions. I mean, they've got 3 tight ends that they could play. They've got a bunch of backs that they could play. They've got 4 or 5 wide receivers that they can play, including Keelan Cole, who can play all the positions. And then I think as the season progresses, they'll settle on a 3 receiver set. They'll settle on a starting tight end. But I think it could be murky early in the season for sure. With that said, all these guys are super cheap. And so the Jets are going to be in my sneaky stacks article.
Interesting. By the way, Denzel Mims, you mentioned, DraftKings, they switched over to SB Tech lines today. And here in Colorado, we finally got those SB Tech lines, and they're going to be in all the states eventually. They're in most of them now. They has had Denzel Mims up at 600.5 receiving yards. I'm sure that line is likely gone by the time you guys listen to this, but that was one that I put in the article today under on Denzel Mims, 600.5 receiving yards. Just a good example of the books not understanding what's going on with the depth charts. Okay. That's going to do it for this updated coaching change episode. Hope you guys enjoyed. Be sure to subscribe on both iTunes and YouTube. It is indeed free, so you don't miss an episode. We're going to do our best to do 3 to even 4 episodes a week right up until week 1 begins. For Evan, for Jerry, I am Adam. Good luck, everybody.